Hi guys, it's Ariana. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, we're going to be reading some more scary stories. So this is probably going to be a shorter video than what I usually post just because it is like the 9th day in a row of filming and I'm really tired. It is a long weekend and I've had a long weekend of visiting with family and friends and stuff because it's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada and I am absolutely so exhausted. So this is going to be a shorter video, but I hope you guys are okay with that. As per usual, I have my wicked candle in here making the whole room smell like caramel apple. I don't have anything else to ramble about, so let's jump into these spooky stories. So this story is from Instagram. This is one of my followers that messaged me, so I'm not going to say anyone's names or anything. Everything is going to be anonymous, but let's jump into their story. I'd always been curious about Ouija boards, and my mom has always told me to stay away from them. She had a bad experience with one, but has never elaborated, so I don't ask. We've both seen spirits and had paranormal experiences since as far back as me being a child. I can even go into details with those things at another date. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I'm going to say that Tinder had a role to play in this. I know it might sound strange, but bear with me. It was my birthday of 2017 and I was at a bar, but on Tinder. A guy had messaged me and I told him to come meet me at the bar to have a drink. Little did I know what would lead to for the next 5 or 6 years. You'll understand. You see, this man became my best friend. Not immediately, by any means. There'd be a marriage, my son was born, and a separation, and a bunch of other things in between. This brings us to August 2021. My landlord had been trying to evict me for about 11 months. He legally had no reason, but I was fed up with getting non-stop notices. My best friend offered to let me and my child move in with them. After all, he was recently separated and had a 3-bedroom apartment all to himself. He had been diagnosed with cancer in late November 2020. It seems like a big thing to skip over in me telling of this story, but it didn't feel as significant until I was living with him while he was living with it. My friend, his name is Ken. He lived many lives, and by that, I mean he achieved so much in less than 40 years. He'd been in a film, he'd written and published a novel, he was in a band that toured with bands I used to and still listen to. He went to school multiple times and he even had a lab technician. He had been a security guard, a private eye, and had driven escorts. Let's just say, professional night therapists. Around and protected them. He'd wait in vehicles like he was the muscle. We had shared stories of paranormal interest, saying he never experienced much himself, but was into the occult. He had tarot cards, and he often used them. Tons of books on magic, some dark. And then there was the Ouija board. I'd always been drawn to them, even having dreams of them telling me to come find the board in the attic, while spending the night at my grandparents' house as a child. Here and Now was finally one that I'd been offered to use, with someone I trusted with my life, nonetheless. Ken had mentioned on multiple occasions that he had connected with something through the board when he was really young, about 15 years before. He had mentioned a deal, but he didn't want it to involve me, but something had told him that he needed me to use it with him. He would make sigils to protect us, as well as Ken using proper opening and closing rules. We used the board many times. One time will never leave my memory though. It was something Ken hadn't even known about, so I knew it was for real. My best friend was my roommate. He went through absolute hell with cancer. He went through chemo, and we shaved all of his hair off together. Then he went through radiation, and then they tried to do a T-cell transplant. It was all very invasive, and he was growing tired. He always refused to tell me how bad it actually was until after he beat those odds. This time, he was in the hospital, and things felt more serious. Especially since he'd been in the hospital from December, and by this time it was now February. My friend Kat and I were spending more and more time together as the house had felt so empty without my best friend in it. On this particular night, February 8th, 2022, Kate and I decided to use the Ouija board together. It wasn't our first one, but it would be the one that would leave the biggest impact on me. We were upset about Ken, obviously. Our friend was still in the hospital. They were making sure he'd be able to breathe on his own and that he was stable. They had said that the cancer had stopped growing and that he just needed to be monitored, but I had a feeling that I wasn't getting the full story. Kate and I started our usual way, only things of light and love, and that whole thing. We wanted to get into the facts though. We connected with something almost immediately. We didn't even care to ask who it was. That was likely our mistake. We asked the board if Ken was going to get out of the hospital, and the board quickly moved to yes. Silly wording. You need to be specific with these things. I asked, will Ken be okay? And again, the planchette slowly moved to the word yes. I was now getting impatient and I just said, is Ken going to live? The planchette almost nervously moved to no. And I laughed. There's no way it'd be able to know, right? We asked how long he was going to live for, and the planchette moved to 6. I was getting angry. I yelled 6 what? And it moved back to 6 again. I started raising my voice and shouted, 6 what? Months, years, weeks, minutes? And the planchette again, like it was intentionally trying to piss me off, kept moving to the number 6. At this point, I'd had it. This thing was a joke. We finished the session and I continued on with our night. Kate and I, without the board. Ken was let out of the hospital a few weeks later, maybe 2. See, the board was wrong. He was given a clean bill of health, but was on an oxygen tank, just in case. The day he was released, he came to the house to come see me and pick up his cats. I made sure my kids went out to say hi to him. He was moving in with his parents for a little while until he was on tip-top shape again. We'd see him soon. I'd get to hug him again soon. My best friend was okay. We'd been messaging, but not as often as we had been while he was in the hospital. He was sleeping a lot and he didn't seem to be as okay as he led me to believe. But hey, the guy just beat cancer. On March 25th, I got a message from his mom that read, "We're taking Ken to the hospital. His feet are the size of footballs. No reason to be concerned, it happens all the time. But less than 2 weeks since he'd been released from the hospital, I was worried, understandably. I hadn't heard anything and I figured all was going fine. Until I got that message. Just less than 6 hours later, the one I'll never forget. His mom sent me a, "We've been told, end of life," followed by, "I can't talk." I was in absolute disbelief. I had full body chills. It couldn't be true. It was a bit of fluid. We were just talking 2 days prior and he told me he needed to get some sleep. He'd been fine after they drained the fluid. He had to be. After taking the day to process, but failing to quite miserably, I became a bit of a shell. Another day passed and I was still hoping there'd be some sort of miracle. The doctor had gotten it wrong. The waiting felt like I was slowly dying. His mother kept updating me on how he was doing. He could no longer talk, then he could no longer move. The next day, I was feeling a bit better. Ken and I together were silly. We didn't take much seriously. He'd bought us matching kimonos because we decided we were going to have a tea party, probably a year prior. I never even opened mine. So I went into my bedroom and put his kimono on. I sat on his bed, a room I hadn't dared to enter in about 3 months since he'd been away. But I felt happy and surprisingly calm. It felt like the sun was shining on me and I was truly enjoying the moment. Puffing on his vape that he'd never been seen without, I was singing and smiling. I took a couple photos when suddenly I felt the need to see Ken. The happiness had faded. I left the bedroom and messaged Ken's mom. "Is there any chance I can come visit?" She replied almost instantly, "He's gone." I hurriedly texted my partner, gasping for air, and I moved from the hallway to my own bedroom. He was gone. It had to be a lie. But the peace I had felt, whatever it was that drew me to his room not 10 minutes prior, that couldn't be a coincidence. It seemed awfully peculiar, strange, and curious. I called Kate, and she was in absolute hysterics. Then she says, the Ouija board was right. I took a second, hearing her sob get louder, but I started zoning out. The Ouija board. We hadn't touched it since about February? It was now March. How many weeks had it been? How many days? Where had time gone anyway? I told Kate on the phone that I was going to look at the calendar, and I started yelling. Kate was right. She's right. She didn't understand. It had been 6 weeks and 6 days we had talked to that thing in the Ouija board. I have goosebumps now as I'm typing this. It was right, and I felt defeated. I explained it to her in a panic, and I hung up. I looked out my bedroom window and saw 6 robins sitting in the tree directly outside. 6, 6, 6. If you don't know, a robin is supposed to be a sign of loved one visiting. I felt sick. This was a cruel game. The universe was laughing at me. Kate and I decided to use the Ouija board again a few weeks later. You're not supposed to go into a session with expectations of reaching anyone in particular, as it could attract someone, or rather something, who pretends to be that person. Someone came through stating their name was Rachel, and they said that Ken and I both knew her. I knew no one named by the name Rachel, but maybe Ken had? At least not to my knowledge, but the planchette started moving again while I pondered this. We hadn't asked it anything, and it spelled out, he's okay. And that was that. I still have difficulty believing he's actually gone or that it happened the way it did. I still message him and I want to call him constantly, and I still sleep with the Ouija board in my room. It hasn't been touched since 2022. Ken still visits me. First, it was his voice in a dream. and the feeling of him being nearby but unable to see him. Then it was dreams of us in the past, and me telling him that he was going to die. He told me that he knew. I believed he made a deal with that thing in the Ouija board. He knew something was going to happen eventually. As I had said, Ken lived many lives. He'd rubbed arms with politicians, met the President of the United States, which was a big deal to us as Canadians. He wrote, published, and sold books. He got to tour with the world-renowned bands that I still listen to. He got to meet and work with people in the film industry that I looked up to. He had a beautiful wife, a gorgeous home, the promise of children, everything he could have asked for. Things seemed to be going perfectly for him. But at what price? Things started to get dark. Cancer wasn't the start of it. His wife left him for someone else, citing that she never wanted children. A few short months later, Ken was diagnosed with cancer. We got into a car accident, and his grandmother died the day after that, leaving him a hefty inheritance. Ken was the only child in a wealthy Greek Orthodox family, Catholic. They owned islands in Greece, he traveled, he'd lived, but the biggest goal in his life was to be happy, to have a family, to be a father, to share his life with people he cared about, and he never got to do that. It upset him so much, he thought this was the worst that it could get. Little did he know, that was only the beginning of the end. My dreams, though, they've been more calm now. I get to see Ken and we talk about life, and I feel myself drift away, at peace with my best friend. It's comforting, but I could use one of his hugs. I still sleep with the Ouija board under my bed. I can't bring myself to get rid of it. Sometimes the thought crosses my mind, what if? And I feel as though it's taunting me, that I could maybe get closer to Ken that way, and maybe I could, but then I remind myself, at what cost? So they also sent me a bunch of messages that has a picture of her and I would assume Ken. There's a picture of the Ouija board, which is really freaking creepy. There's some messages that go with the story that are just like her talking to his mom and saying that she's here for him, and the picture of the 6 robins, and the picture of the kimono. Wow, these are really, really sad. So this was a very, very sad story. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. That is a very heartbreaking story and very terrifying at the same time. As you guys know on this channel, I talk about how I don't like Ouija boards. I would never use one. I don't like the idea of them. I don't like the idea of inviting any entity into your house. It just freaks me out. Even if you don't believe that spirit boards are real, I just don't want to mess with it. I don't want to invite anything into my house. And the fact that you've stated multiple times in the story that he made a deal with something is really, really creepy. I hate that so much. And that is so uncomfortable. I hate the fact that he didn't get all of the things in his life that he really wanted, to have a family, to have people to care for, to have children, but he got like fame and rich and all of that other stuff that definitely sounds like he made a deal with something, but he didn't get the end of the deal that he actually wanted. A lot of the time though, when you make a deal with something, there's going to be like a hidden agenda, and there's going to be like a fine print that you don't actually know about, and then something is going to happen. It just kind of reminds me of like the Crossroad Demons in Supernatural, if you've ever watched that show, where they have like 10 years after they make a deal and then the demon hounds come and take you to hell. It's just really, really, really creepy. And the idea of that being actually real, where you can make a deal with something and get like fame and fortune and all of that stuff, just freaks me out. I don't like the idea of it all. I would never make a deal with anything. That's fucking terrifying. But thank you so much for sharing that story. That story was really, really heartbreaking and really scary. Very, very sad. I'm so sorry that you lost your best friend, and to have them go through something so horrific as cancer is just heartbreaking. So awful. So thank you so much for sharing. If you guys have any more stories that you want to share with me on the channel, it can be your own personal stories, it can be fictional, it can be any just creepy stories in general, feel free to message me on Instagram or send me an email. All of my information is listed down below in a pinned comment. It's also listed down below in my description box. I'm sorry that this is going to be a shorter video, but I am absolutely exhausted. I need to edit this and post it. So this is where I'm going to end the video. If you guys made it to the end of the video, please leave me one of your guys' favorite colors in the form of a heart, because this author definitely needs a lot of hearts sent to them. So leave me a heart emoji down below with your favorite color. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys at the next video. Bye.